Say hello to your neighbor and silence your cell phones.
Like half pickleball and half staff.
And just a reminder, if you wish to speak tonight during the meeting, there's a sign-up sheet outside the door. If you didn't sign up and you hear something and you decide suddenly you do want to sign up, you can just feel free to leave at any time and go sign up, and they will continue to bring the sign-up sheets in here. Okay, so we're live. Welcome to the Asheville City Council meeting. We're going to begin tonight by rising for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Got in there?
We got them.
Thanks.
Come on in. Council, if you'll please note on your consent agenda that Vegan Fest, which I love is a thing in Asheville, is being moved from October 2nd to October 16th due to Hurricane Ian. Hopefully it won't hit us, but just anticipation of that weather this weekend, they're moving Vegan Fest, and it's on your consent agenda to October 16th. Okay, and we're just waiting for folks to get seated. Do we have, if you have a vacant seat next to you, raise your hand. That's not very many hands, that's just a couple. Okay.
I think so. Did you talk about them?
What, there's one over there? We're gonna need larger council chambers to accommodate pickleball.
You can turn this
Or just some courts.
Yeah, is this
An indoor
is this
pickleball.
20 by 40? Okay, all right, so we will begin with our consent agenda. Are there any questions, comments regarding the consent agenda or a motion to adopt the same?
This is Sage, I'll move.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second to adopt the consent agenda, and I believe we have one person signed up to speak on the consent agenda. Folks, tonight when you speak, you will have 3 minutes to speak. Please watch the lights on the lectern. Green means go, orange means you're about to stop, and red means stop. And we will begin with Nina Tovish, who will demonstrate how this works. Maggie, tell the rowdy crowd out there to be quiet. Thank you, Maggie.
Good evening, Council and Mayor. Thanks for the opportunity to speak. I'm here to address item K, which is the $20 million of bonds for the Housing Authority of the City of Asheville to purchase Battery Park Hotel.
No. Okay, that is not what that is. So that's good that you asked that question, but go ahead and make your comment, and then we'll have a clarification.
Lovely, because that's all I wanted. I wanted a clarification. This is the first I've heard of anything having to do with the purchase of Battery Park, and the first I've heard of bonds being issued.
It is not a purchase. This is not a purchase.
And it's not our bond.
It
Yeah,
says
it's-
that in there.
No, it does, no.
It
should not
says, it
say
does say acquisition.
It says acquisition, which
Okay,
certainly sounds like a purchase to me.
yeah.
So I would welcome some clarification about where, especially since another part of the discussion says that there's nothing about this that obligates the city of Asheville to vouch for this bond issuance. So I don't understand this at all, and it's the first I've heard of it, and I would love to have some background about it so that we can know what's happening. Thank you.
Good question. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to the city attorney to talk about item K, which is a resolution approving in principle the issuance of the Housing Authority of the City of Asheville up to $20 million of multifamily housing revenue bonds for the acquisition and rehabilitation of Battery Park apartments. So the Housing Authority is a separate entity from the city, and Battery Park, furthermore, is owned by a private entity, but we'll have the city attorney explain more why this has to be on our consent agenda.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and that's an excellent question. Apologize for any confusion that this has created on the agenda. This is, in fact, more of a procedural vote than a substantive one, and what I mean by that is that these are not City of Asheville bonds. The terminology acquisition is not intended to be on there. This is specifically for the rehabilitation of Battery Park Apartments. The Housing Authority is the issuer of these bonds. I do see David Nash is in the audience tonight, but I'm going to take my stab at explaining succinctly why the city is taking action on this. As part of any bonds issued by a local housing authority, there is a federal requirement set by the IRS that requires the local municipality where the housing authority is located to officially approve through its governing board the issuance of those bonds. That does not, however, assume any responsibility, liability, or financial obligation for the bonds itself for the municipality. Again, it is a procedural requirement that the IRS places upon us to approve our local housing authority's issuance of bonds. But the city takes on absolutely no financial responsibility for that, and they are, again, not City of Asheville bonds, but they will go specifically for the rehabilitation. And Mayor, again, David Nash is in the audience.
I know, I
If
just
there's
saw,
anything
I
more you'd like
spotted
to add.
him. We have the Executive Director of the Housing Authority right here, David Nash. Would you like to add anything to that, please?
And do we need to make an amendment to the motion to remove the word acquisition from the consent agenda?
If we could look at the actual resolution and make, Brad, if you could, while Dave's speaking, if you could look at the actual resolution and make sure that wording is correct.
It is correct. I think
Okay.
that first of all, the Housing Authority is not acquiring Battery Park Apartments. These are not city bonds. There's no allocation going here. The Housing Authority has been asked to issue tax-exempt bonds, which we have the authority to do. Those bonds will be sold to investors on the bond market, and those proceeds will be used by National Church residences to fund the acquisition, I think internally among their own nonprofits, and rehab of Battery Park. So I think
And that's the
a-
entity that owns Battery Park. You
That's
just
the
said it. It's
entity.
called,
National Church residences, I believe.
it's called National Church Residences, plural. Yeah.
And they will be doing, in addition to somehow transferring the title internally among their nonprofit organizations, they will be rehabbing the apartments, putting in new kitchen cabinets, new heating and air systems, and other things that the building needs an upgrade. I believe maybe some new windows. So they'll be improving it for the residents, but it effectively will not be, definitely won't be a change of ownership to the Housing Authority or to the city.
Right.
And neither the city nor the Housing Authority is liable for those bonds. They are paid back from the revenue from the rents received and subsidies received by that property.
So, and just so folks know, Battery Park is 100% housing for voucher holders.
They have their own separate contract with HUD for voucher assist. It's not a voucher, but for housing assistance, and they're predominantly seniors who live there.
Well, it's a great project. I mean, it's badly needed, I think, in terms
Yeah,
of
it's been
the
a while
buildings
since
needs to
they've
be
upgraded.
updated. Yep. Thank you for that explanation.
Sure.
And the resolution?
I think the resolution should not be changed. The language actually in there was signed off by bond counsel as well, and that is mirroring the federal language around this type of approval, so it includes just a broader spectrum of language.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. Any other questions or comments regarding the consent agenda before we vote? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, thank you.
Mayor, just to let you know that the overflow room on the first floor is open and there are people down there.
Okay, great. Do you have a mic, Maggie? No?
Yes.
Okay. Dan's gonna, remember the picture. Speak into your mic. Okay. We have a little cheat sheet to remind us to speak into our mic so you can hear us. Okay. All right, so we have a couple of presentations and reports tonight. The first is the Buncombe County Bond Program, and I have on my agenda that Chairman Brownie Newman of the Buncombe County Commission is here. Good. Which I didn't see him right away. Wow.
Good evening, Mayor and members of council. Thank you for the opportunity to be here this evening. I have just a short presentation, informational presentation about the 2 bond referendum items that will be before the voters this November. So I'll keep it short. So if y'all are here late this evening, it's not my fault, okay? But it's nice to be with you. All right. All right, the 2 bond referendums will address 2 of the big challenges we face as a community. Whether we're going to be able to preserve what we all love about this place in terms of its environmental health and the natural beauty and the working family farms in Buncombe County, and whether regular people are going to be able to continue to afford to call this place home. So affordable housing and conservation are the 2 separate items that will be voted on, and they'll be voted on independently. So they could both pass or both fail, or one of them can pass and one of them can fail. So the voters will make that decision. So last fall, the county commissioned a feasibility study with the Trust for Public Land. The Trust for Public Land is a national organization that is focused on open space protection, primarily through these kind of voter-approved bond referendums. So they approached Buncombe County. They have received some grant funding to support the feasibility assessments for conservation-focused bonds in the southern Appalachian region of our country. So they reached out to Buncombe County to ask us whether that might be of interest to Buncombe County. And we said, yeah, we think that could be a very strong interest here. That's an issue that's of great importance to our constituents. But the other great challenge we face is around affordable housing. So would you be willing to conduct a feasibility study around affordable housing in conjunction with assessing the feasibility for a conservation-focused bond? And they said, yes, we would be happy to do that. And so they carried out the feasibility study from November until January of 2022. Part of that feasibility assessment was included some public polling to determine whether voters in the community would be interested in this. That came back very favorable, and based on the overall feasibility, the commission approved taking next steps in the process. So these would be general obligation bonds, again, requiring voter approval. The county has a AAA credit rating, and that combined with, if they are approved, the use of general obligation bonds means that the county and the taxpayers will be able to access these capital funds at the lowest possible cost. So it's a really good way to secure funds to invest in these kinds of capital projects. And all of the funds would be obligated to be spent specifically on capital projects. They couldn't be used for sort of ongoing operational costs, but rather for capital projects. All right, so the issuance of bonds, this is all governed by North Carolina general statutes. So we are following the process for that's laid out in the state statutes around this. So in June of 2022, the county commissioners voted to adopt the bond orders. And then in August, those were approved by the North Carolina Local Government Commission. And so I want to just read the actual language that will be on the ballot. And this is not the language that we would necessarily choose if it were up to us to kind of frame these issues for the community, but the language that's used for affordable housing and conservation is basically just explicitly and in detail set forth in state statute. So we basically just have to use that language, even though it's not necessarily how any of us would talk about these issues if we were just meeting our neighbor on the sidewalk and talking about conservation issues or affordable housing. So this is the actual language, and under state statute, the bond funds must be spent only for the purposes explicitly stated on the bond language. So the conservation ballot language, shall the order authorizing $30 million of bonds to pay the capital cost for acquisition and improvement of land or interest therein for conservation and protection of natural resources and preservation of farmland, including but not limited to the development of greenways and trails for recreation purposes, and providing that additional taxes may be levied in an amount sufficient to pay the principal and interest on the bonds be approved. In terms of the county's goals around conservation, a few of the key ones that are relevant to investment of the bond funds. So currently 18% of the land in Buncombe County, of the 420,000 acres that we have in Buncombe County, about 18% of that is in some type of protected conservation status, and that's Pisgah National Forest, Blue Ridge Parkway, lands that the various land trust organizations in the county have worked with landowners to place in conservation easements, city parks. The county's got a couple of existing protected areas. The commissioners have approved the goal to, between now and 2030, to help conserve an additional 6,000 acres of land across Buncombe County between now and 2030, which would increase the total conserved area in the county from 18% to 20% over that period of time. And we think 6,000 acres over that 7 years is a very ambitious goal, but we think it's achievable. We have some existing really proven models for working on farmland conservation and doing conservation easements. So these funds would help really scale those efforts up. And the county's Agricultural Advisory Board would be the group making the recommendations around prioritizing investments in family farmland protection. The affordable housing ballot language. Shall the order authorizing $40 million of bonds to pay for the capital cost of housing for the benefit of persons of low or moderate income, including construction of related infrastructure improvements and the acquisition of related land and right-of-ways, providing that additional taxes may be levied in an amount sufficient to pay the principal and interest on the bonds, be approved. In terms of our affordable housing goals, the commissioners have adopted the goal of supporting the construction of 1,850 additional affordable rental units for households at less than 80% AMI and with an average of 60% AMI of level of affordability between now and 2030. Also the construction of 400 additional affordable home ownership units and implementation of 500 home repair projects with a focus on senior citizens and residents with disabilities. So these are all capital projects and will be the focus of the investment of the affordable housing bonds if approved. All right, oversight and transparency. So the investment of the funds will be reviewed annually through the county's annual audit process. The county's going to create a web page that basically tracks how all the dollars invested through the bonds are spent in real time. And of course, as with the city's bonds, they won't be all invested right away. They'll be invested over a period of 6 or 7 years. And so the web page will show all the different projects that are invested in as the funds are deployed. And we are also creating a community oversight committee. The commissioners have approved a resolution creating a committee, and then so the committee members will be appointed, assuming the bonds, one or both of the bonds are passed in November. And that committee's job is not to make recommendations on how the funds are spent. It's simply to review how the funds are spent and to confirm all of them are spent consistent with the purposes outlined in the bond language. All right. And finally, I think this is our last slide. For folks who would like to get more information on the bonds, they can go to the Buncombe County website and click on 2022 bonds. And as the county government itself cannot advocate to vote yes or no on the bonds, but the county government's job is to basically provide clear factual information about the bonds so folks can go to the website to learn more. So that concludes the presentation. So thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you all tonight, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Great. Are there any questions?
I found one option. Portia Asheville.
I don't know, Siri had a question, I guess.
I don't know how to answer that.
That's weird.
Any questions?
I have one question. Thank you for taking the time to be here today. I recently attended a county commission meeting where there was a presentation for Urban 3 articulating concern about the disproportionate impact of property taxes on our historic Black neighborhoods and legacy neighborhoods. The same presentation has been presented to us. So it's not necessarily a question that needs to be answered today in fullness, but I will be seeking answers about how we, as a city and as members of the county and sharing in the work for leading in our community, can impact them and mitigate the disproportionate impact of property taxes and the impact on renters, commercial properties, supporting our local businesses, to be able to support this bond.
Yep. So kind of a separate issue from the bonds, but an issue that really we are very interested in as well. As council may be aware, the commission appointed an ad hoc committee to look at the whole issue of the revaluation process and how it affects, residents in the community, and to make sure it's being done in the most accurate way possible, consistent with the state laws that we have to follow. And the ad hoc committee made a number of different recommendations back to the county commission about ways that they think that it can be further improved. And so it's an issue we are very interested in. We really appreciated the city council working with the county commission to create the initial property tax sort of abatement process or homeowner grant program, however you want to call it. But with the purpose of mitigating how property taxes affect the affordability of lower and moderate income homeowners in our community. So we think that's a great start, but we think there's a lot else that we can do as well. So we really appreciate Urban 3 and other groups kind of elevating these issues in the community, and we think that there's a lot of opportunities to do more. So appreciate you asking the question. Yeah. Any others?
Just, Brownie,
Yeah.
thanks for coming.
Sure.
When you did your study about affordable housing, et cetera, did the concept of short-term rentals and the fact that the county is allowing whole house short-term rentals, did that come into play, and has that altered or the thinking of the commissioners? I'm just, we, as you know, have limited or we disallow whole house short-term rentals, with part of it being that we believe that it has they have a negative effect on housing availability. And I was just wondering if your study addressed that at all, and if that if you're rethinking your policy.
Yeah. Short answer is no, it did not. The feasibility study was really kind of focused on, whether the county was in a position to look at doing a bond referendum around investments in affordable housing and conservation programs. And it was a pretty tight timeline from like last November when we started thinking about it, or just having this conversation with Trust for Public Land. It had to be decided by, I think, April to go through the local government approval process. So it was a very tight time frame. So we were sort of looking at, is that even possible, or do we need to wait for 2024? So it was really kind of focused on that set of issues. But I mean, just speaking purely as one member of the county commission, I mean, I really agree with the concerns that you're raising. And I think the process where that can be addressed, it's not through this bond referendum, but I do believe it's affecting our housing market in a significant way. And the county is going through a process to adopt a new comprehensive plan, which is really like re-looking at all the different land use policies in the county, setting goals for the future around growth management and everything that's related to that. So I personally do believe that the county needs to look at the policies around that. The proliferation of it has just been sort of, incredible over the last couple of years. There have been, I think a lot of the members of council and your staff have been looking at these issues too. There's been a number of court rulings that speak to this issue. We've been, really concerned that they might be tying local government's hands in terms of what policy options we could have to look at how short-term or vacation rentals are managed at the community level. There was actually a School of Government webinar last week where some of the state experts on this went through it. I attended that day-long webinar and came out of it actually quite a bit more encouraged that we still have a lot more options as local communities to address those issues through land use policies than perhaps some were concerned we might have in light of some of the recent court rulings, which do need to be addressed, but it sounds like there's ways to do that. So just speaking for myself, I agree the issue needs to be worked on.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I share your concern, Gwen. I think the problem for me is that when we have residential units being used for commercial use, that we're then asking the community to support affordable housing for regular people. And I'd like to, hopefully it will be for working and poor people who live and work here and make this place special, as you mentioned. So I wonder if a step looks like making sure our staff can put our resourceful heads together and come up with a solution to, it's either a zoning problem or a taxation problem, but the residential use or the residential zoning is being used for commercial use.
This is on the property tax issue you're talking about.
And short-term rentals.
How to categorize the use of the property in terms of property tax rating.
Specifically because we have housing units tied up in short-term rentals.
how these properties are taxed
Yeah,
is also being looked at. I'm not quite as
Right,
optimistic
if
on
you
that.
use
but-
a property for personal residence versus it's being used for an Airbnb, for example, should it be valued at in a different way?
As a
Otherwise,
commercial
the
property.
taxpayers are
Yeah.
bearing more of a burden for lodging use.
Yeah. I understand the question. I think we're probably on the same page about it, whether we can,
Yeah,
whether they're legally,
That's
the
the
state will
challenge.
agree with that. I think we're looking at it, but I'm not sure how that's going to get answered.
Ronnie, I don't have a question, but I have a comment, more of appreciation. I feel like I've been watching affordable housing in this area for a decade, and what I've seen the county do under your leadership in the last few years and forming an affordable housing committee in the first place, just the rate at which you all are charging at this problem is impressive. And I guess is this the first affordable housing bond that the county has taken on? It is, and I'm going to be supporting it personally because I think it is imperative, but I really just wanted to say thank you to you and the other commissioners for helping us tackle this problem. I know when I was running a couple years ago, it was a lot of what I was hearing from the community is that the city and the county needed to partner more on these solutions, and I see that's what's happening, so
Yeah.
I just want to say thank
Well,
you.
I appreciate that. I really appreciated from the time, again, this kind of was raised as just an idea to the time it was like, hey, let's really look at getting this on the ballot and investing in it. It all went really fast. The county staff did a great job, going through that process. Trust for Public Land really helped us out a lot too. And the commission, I think folks just realized that just the scale of this problem requires us to do more. And so the city has been leading on this issue, and I think folks are realizing the county just really needs to up its game on it too. So.
And I want to support this conversation around concern over the loss of units to short-term. I know we were conversing last week about an article issued in the paper that actually had an incorrect statistic. And it was saying about 8,200 units in Buncombe County were being used for short-term rental, but it turns out some of those are 2-unit rooms per, so the number's more around 4,000. But even at that rate, if 4,000 units in the county are being used for
significant.
visitors, and we're talking, I believe that slide was 2,750 units is the goal. So
Yeah.
we're in a race to keep up if it doesn't change.
It's going in the wrong direction. Yep, I agree.
All right, we grilled you a little bit,
Yeah,
but you
sorry.
did very well. Yes.
I would expect no less.
We like having you here, though. Come back.
Yeah.
Yeah, come back anytime.
All right. All right. Great to
Thank
see all of
you.
you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, in the second part, under presentations and reports, we're going to hear a noise ordinance update.
Wait,
Ben, are you having flashbacks here?
It still says,
Mayor, if I could, it's interesting that you have been, or we have been titled
Yeah.
as Development Services Director,
Yeah,
but he
yes.
actually has a dual role. He is also an interim Assistant City Manager. And we also have Todd Justice, who's here as our noise administrator. I don't know if you all have met him. In fact, I don't think I've met him. Just by video, yeah, that's right. So we're just going to give you an annual kind of update on the noise ordinance, its performance, what we think are challenges, successes, and Mr. Woody, I will let you take over from here.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Good evening, Mayor, members of council. I am here in my Development Services hat tonight, and again, I want to thank Todd Justice for serving the role of noise administrator. He's also our compliance coordinator, so he's kind of managing the enforcement functions in DSD. We're going to cover a little bit of background information, not much. We all lived this together a year ago, so we know most of the background. I want to talk a little bit about some complaint and response data, and then what's working well and what have been some of our challenges. And we start with kind of the end in mind and the key takeaways. So, and what you'll see this through the presentation, but generally the number of complaints has remained consistent with the previous 5 years. As part of reimagining public safety, the noise ordinance enforcement was shifted from APD to DSD. That's not entirely, but that's primarily DSD administers that ordinance now. I'll explain this a little more, but in the past year, DSD has been able to close about 71% of the noise complaints. We still rely on our partners in APD to help with after-hours complaints and sometimes complaints that require, that may be associated with illegal activities. We've had good success, I believe, in reducing chronic complaints and violations. I think parts of the ordinance help with that, the objectivity of it, as well as some of the staff outreach we've been able to do the past year. Then there are some challenges, and I'll talk about this more, but I want to be clear that there's oftentimes that a business can comply with the decibel standards, but we still continue to get complaints about that. So again, I'm going to show you a lot of complaint data tonight. Complaint data doesn't necessarily mean there's an issue with the ordinance. It just means that we're getting complaints about a sound generation. And finally, there are subjective noise standards, and they've been challenging the downtown area for us, and I'll talk about that a little bit. So we'll kind of dive right in. You remember this probably. We started in 2019. We had COVID in the middle of it, did a lot of stakeholder engagement. Finally had the ordinance adopted in 2021 with an effective date of September 15th. So the data I'm going to show you tonight is going to really be from September to August. So the data ranges are going to reflect the past year that we've worked under the ordinance. We've hired staff. We've appointed a noise advisory board. We've got a dashboard that's up, and I'll have a link to that in the presentation for the public so you can kind of track this live, how we're doing. And of course, we've overall launched the compliance section. It used to be, so in 2019, when somebody had a noise complaint, they called the non-emergency line. 99.9% of noise complaints went through that line. APD responded. And what we've been able to do, I think, is we have multiple ways to file complaints now. We log, track those complaints. We take a data-driven process to try to respond. We investigate every complaint. It doesn't always feel like, but every complaint that comes in, all 1,600, are looked at and investigated as best we can. And then, of course, we share all our data, our reports, our noise, our decibel readings. All that is available publicly online, and the links are in this presentation on this slide. So here's a 5-year rolling window of noise complaints, September to August, because that's our window. You can see this first year of the new ordinance, we had just over 1,600 complaints, relatively consistent with the previous 4 years. I'll give a little bit of an explanation. Actually, I think that the past year was probably lower, but in September and October, when we first rolled this ordinance out, we got a ton of complaints, a lot of interest. I think that was just an increased awareness by the community. For example, last September, we got to close to 200 complaints. I think this September, we'll probably get about 140. So again, I think September and October last year may have been a little artificially high, just given some of the awareness that existed. Times, you know this, the city gets noisy at about 9 p.m., tapers off till about midnight. So again, those are our busiest times in terms of complaints. So when it requires immediate response, we still rely on our APD partners for that. Complaints by type. One thing that we've started tracking, this doesn't exist in previous data, but we actually track the type of noise complaint. What is the source of the noise? And there's actually 9 other sources that you don't see. There was going to be too many bars on this graph, so we've showed you, I think that's the top 7 or 8 complaint types, but there's 9 others that are lumped into other source. So there's actually more robust data. Others are like trash pickup or things of that nature. But as we've always said, the number one source of complaints is kind of residential, neighbor to neighbor. I'll talk a little bit about how we're handling those, and of course, that's followed up really by complaints from sound generated by business operations. Again, by source, we'll talk about the role of APD in a second, but again, in 2019, basically 100% of noise complaints came through the non-emergency line. You can see we've got a lot of our residents now that either use direct email, and what jot form means is that's an online complaint form. So it's actually pretty interesting because you can go to the city's website and it kind of guides you through the complaint process to get us enough information to respond. So we've got a lot of different ways that we can get complaints now. We did a little bit of mapping on geography. This is always, I find this very interesting. These are census block groups. These are all of Asheville's census block groups. The map on the left that says 2019, again, that's September 2018 to August 2019. That's the last full year that APD handled the noise ordinance. So that's really a reflection of really APD receiving all the complaints. The middle map is September 20 to August 21. That's really the year that we were finalizing the noise ordinance. So APD was still the primary, but DSD was working on the noise ordinance and beginning to be involved. And the map on the right, 21 to 2022, is this past year, and that's really with DSD being the primary administrator of the noise ordinance. What I'll one just small observation I think you can see is the noise, the concentration of complaints really continues to focus on downtown. I mean, downtown's always our busiest and probably noisiest place, and I think you really can see this in this map. That continues to be the case, and our complaints really do concentrate in areas where there's greater density. And this is kind of a table of that. These are the 8 noisiest census block groups in the city of Asheville. So these 8 census block groups comprise over 40% of the total noise complaints. So we spend a lot of time in these block groups. Rather than use the census number, we tried to put some neighborhoods in these to give some context. And again, the column on the left is last year of APD doing all this. The column on the far right is DSD and APD doing this. Those are probably the best 2 to look at because the one in the middle has some COVID influence in it.
So can I stop you right here?
Sure,
Sorry, this is
absolutely.
Antoinette. Sorry
Yep.
to bother you, but since this one is up. This time, I guess a little more than this time last year, when we were getting ready to vote, I remember having a conversation with Deborah about the residential nature of the complaints and how the vast majority of our complaints came from residential neighborhoods. And the conversation you and I had was actually that Black and brown neighborhoods were disproportionately more likely to have noise complaints. And as a result of that, we had neighborhood associations in those areas writing in to request a lower decibel level. So while it appeared that, at least in the public, it became a discussion of music, but what was actually happening was Black and brown neighborhoods were requesting help. And when I look at this, it looks like, for the most part, there has been some success. Is that how you read that?
It is how I read that, yes.
Okay.
And so I appreciate those comments, and I'll elaborate a little bit. I think what you see in this is, and we'll talk about this, give a lot of credit to Daniel Oropesa. He's our compliance officer. He spends a lot of time trying to work with residential neighborhoods, particularly in these census block groups. And I do think that you can see that we've made some progress in partnership, trying to be responsive to the noise concerns that exist in some of these multifamily developments. And I think you can see those. It's interesting where you see, for example, South Slope, Lee Walker Heights, that's a really low number in 2018-19. I think that's actually reflective of when they were preparing to rebuild Lee Walker Heights. And so that skews a little bit. Another thing I would probably point your attention to is you see the Montford, the 2 references to Montford. I actually think we've made good progress with the residential noise complaints in those areas, but we've seen an increase in commercial noise, business-related noise complaints in those areas. So when you really get into the data, I think we've had some success working with our residential communities, and I'm talking a little bit more about that in a second. But and of course, downtown's always busy and noisy. Another thing that we do that's really interesting, I think, is we've created closure codes. So every time we get a noise complaint, that maybe is my 3 minutes up? Does that mean I'm going too long, Maggie? Okay. I'm sorry. The closure code, there are 9 more of these as well. So this is a really robust list. So when you see other, that includes 9 other types of closure codes. These are just the 7 or 8 ones we use the most. A noise complaint closure code can change over time, but what we do is we kind of track the disposition of every noise. So this includes 1,672 noise complaints. We track the disposition of each one, and you can kind of see, again, our performance. Real quick, you see APD, handled by APD in the field. We still have a great partnership with APD. A lot of times they'll just go solve the problem. We get that information, we track it. Sometimes we find that noise complaints actually aren't just noise, or maybe illegal activities or alcohol or other things happening, and we refer the law enforcement agency to handle that. So again, we kind of know we know the life cycle of every noise complaint, and this kind of reflects that in this data set.
And Ben, if I could interject, I think that's what we were hearing from Ms. Mosley in terms of the help It's not just noise, but it's some of the other behavior
Yeah.
that accompanies noise.
That's right, that's a good point, and we are able to kind of know and understand that now and place that complaint accordingly or address it accordingly. Role of APD real quick, as we all know, this is part of reimagining public safety, and one of our goals, one of our many goals was to try to partner with APD and reduce their need to respond to some of these nuisance type calls, and I think we've done a good job in year one. We'll have to see how that works over, as we get more years under our belt, we'll see what this really looks like, but right now, DSD is closing about 71% of all the noise complaints that come in. APD closes about 29%. Some of those are things that APD can handle. Some of those are actually law enforcement, illegal activities, domestic violence. There's lots of other things that come in as noise complaints. Then the other thing is that we have decreased the number of calls to the non-emergency line by about 24%. That'll be a tougher one to reduce further because people are just used to calling that non-emergency line number, but we continue to try to find other ways to receive and handle these noise complaints. And I'm almost done. So last couple of slides, what's working well out of this? What do we think is actually working as planned? I think giving people different ways to access noise complaints, using data to try to find trends or chronic issues and be more strategic in our follow-up. We think that's working really well. We think compliance from the business community has worked extremely well. Having an objective standard is pretty easy. You go out there, you measure it, and then they make adjustments to meet that. And that's almost always how that works. Doesn't mean everybody's happy with it, because it's still, but we can usually get businesses in compliance with the decibel levels. Sound exceedance permits, again, not everybody's happy with the decibel levels, but they've worked really well as a tool for compliance. We get great cooperation with that permit process. I think we've done a lot of outreach and education, and to Councilman Mosley's kind of point is when we do have noise issues there, we're able to understand and respond better. We've established relationships with 64 apartment complexes in Asheville. We've had meetings, in-person meetings with 46 apartment complexes and the property managers. So we are touching in person most of these apartment developments or multifamily developments, and that relationship helps us work with them directly to respond to noise issues. And finally, objective standards are pretty, Todd will tell you this, objective standards are really easy to enforce. And so we've done well with those, I think. Some of our challenges is just, and I'll start with the public expectation of staff availability and response. We're not 24/7, we're not on call, we're DSD. We do a lot of great work from the computer. We do respond, we do take measurements. But again, it's just shifting the public expectation of what response looks like under this new program. We do investigate every complaint, every one of them. They're just not always a violation. And then, of course, we have complaints of a criminal nature that we take as a noise complaint, but we've got to work with our law enforcement partners to kind of move those into a different type of response. Compliance with ordinance, we've struggled, admittedly, with downtown amplification. We have a subjective standard for amplification that occurs in public space. Most individuals will comply if we ask them to turn it down. Some won't. When they don't, it's very difficult. Again, we're not law enforcement, so those can be challenging situations. And then motor vehicle violations, I've said this before, DSD is not in a position to go make motor vehicle stops. So that's challenging for us, but an area that we continue to try to think of other ways to maybe be effective. And then lastly, in terms of a challenge, I think where you have residential that abuts commercial and industrial, we don't really have transition standards. So you can get a business that's in compliance, but if you're the immediate neighboring residents, you're probably going to still have to tolerate nuisance noise. Sometimes it's just allowed to be beside a business. So next steps for us is we're going to continue to assess the effectiveness of this ordinance and program. We're going to continue with our education and outreach efforts. For example, like motor vehicle noise, there's some other communities that are doing some outreach and signage and things to try to help with that. We want to explore that. And then we're going to try to develop some targeted enforcement strategies for the areas where we need to make improvement. Then we'll work with our noise advisory board to develop recommended changes to the current standards, hope to bring that back to the council at some point in the future. And then we want to continue to provide updates to the council and the community. kind of end with the beginning there, and there's our key takeaways. And I can answer any questions you have. And I'm sorry that took longer than I thought it was going to.
You did great. That was great. Very thorough. A lot of people want to know about this issue. So when we adopted the revisions to the noise ordinance, it was a packed house, and we had a lot of folks from the music community from, and I'm just wondering what the feedback has been there. If it's been, where we're sitting, we're not hearing complaints about this, but maybe you're having a different experience. Tell us a little bit about how that's been working out.
I think it's worked well. You know, we've actually made a lot of relationships with the music venues and operators, and we've made ourselves available. We do proactive readings. We share that data with the music industry. I find that they're always more than willing to adjust as needed to meet the requirements. So they've been easy to work with. In acknowledgement of the residents, you know, that still doesn't mean that there are residents that hear music and probably are frustrated with the decibel limits. And maybe there's space there to continue to work with music venues to maybe they can mitigate because they have options to do that, not just because the ordinance says they do. And I guess that's the next place we want to explore is your ordinance compliant, but what else can you do to further mitigate the sound impact? And so far, they've been easy to work with.
Yes, I did have a question. Can we go back a couple slides to the challenges? You know, as someone who studied the science of sound, I'm so glad that our whole city is getting to experiment with this, and it's been frustrating for some folks too. The way that sound travels across the river, the way that sound bounces around buildings is amazing. I wanted to take an opportunity to say thank you to anyone from the Noise Advisory Board who's watching this meeting, because it's been a big, heavy lift to ask folks to volunteer to do that work. I've appreciated watching those meetings and watching y'all go through those challenges together. The commercial and industrial districts abutting residential districts does seem to be where we have like a challenge that needs still to be addressed. When it goes to those buckets of the residential complaints, the three buckets that I hear the most are construction. It seems for some folks like it's constant. HVAC, air conditioning units, it can be schools even. And then the third one has been music. And that folks who are close to a lot of resources also are close to a lot of the sound of hustle and bustle and cultural experience. So I guess that's the area where I'm curious, especially with the construction noise, the times of day that construction can happen, the HVAC units, what can be done to reflect those noises of HVAC units back to the facility? And then what is being done with those relationships that are being established, not just with the venues, but also with the neighborhoods, so that there's good communication flow and expectations?
Yeah, thank you for those questions. Those are three challenging areas.
And then I don't expect you to have to answer all those today.
Yeah.
I think those are questions for our community to keep having, and also to be happening at the Noise Advisory Board, but.
I guess maybe I'll answer it this way. I think those are areas that oftentimes venues, noisemakers, they can get into compliance, but I still think that leaves residents, particularly ones that are really close by, frustrated. And I don't know that I know the answer today, but I do think that would be a great place for the Noise Advisory Board to help with that. And that's where, again, we may have to just have some creative ways, maybe guides or maybe like best practices in some instances, to help these adjoining businesses comply or at least be a better neighbor. So I don't have an answer specifically, but I think those are areas that we're challenged with.
And it's not only a challenge for housing, but it's also a benefit of being very, very close to so many resources in bustling areas, not just in the downtown area, but along the spines of corridors that are our neighborhood corridors.
Good question, thank you.
Quick question, and this may be, I'm not sure if you will know, Ben, but I know with the motor vehicle violations, that's the one I'm continuing to hear a lot about in downtown, the loud vehicles racing by, and I imagine even if you were an officer on the street, it's hard to catch them. It just is a fleeting moment. If I understand correctly, we were going to post some signs about no jake braking, no air brakes, et cetera. Have we been able to implement the signage yet, a year later?
We have not. We have the authority to post those signs. What we have to do is we have to do like a study or an analysis before we can do that. And so that's just an area we haven't had a chance to partner with other departments to work on
Okay.
yet. I will say, I know that the downtown, we get a lot of complaints about loud vehicles, and of course, again, DST's not able to make vehicle stops, but one thing, and this was a recommendation from a resident, but Greenville, South Carolina apparently has started a robust program to try to lessen and reduce vehicle noise in their downtown, and I know Daniel's in contact with the folks in Greenville to try to see what they're doing and see if some of that can be transferable to Asheville.
Okay.
But the Jake breaking, we can do that. We just need to do some studies and probably work with DOT to start to erect. But again, we also, if we put the signs up, we want to have some capacity to enforce that as well, so.
And lastly, I know when we were reviewing the noise ordinance last year, there were some pockets in downtown, some locations specifically that had the most complaints. And I always wonder if the onus is on us to require better design. And I know we've been talking about, we're about to start a new budget session. I think staff begin to look at budgets in October, November. So once again, I'm going to plug that we need to update our design guidelines for the downtown area and the riverfront, because some of these things that right across from Rabbit, that one street, the Aston building, had so much noise. And I always noticed that there were no street trees between the event venue and the complex. And that's something that's on us, street trees. And I think there are a few projects queued up along there, and maybe some of these can be rectified with design and treescape and so on. So perhaps the noise board can
Yeah, I agree
explore
with
those
that.
as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Ben. Before we go on, we meant to do this at the beginning of the meeting, but I mentioned earlier the pending hurricane that is possibly going to be affecting Asheville over this weekend. So just very quickly, just so the folks are aware that we are expecting heavy rain and high winds Friday and Saturday. I know probably a lot of you are tracking this. This is pretty much all my husband has been talking about this week. And just so you know, the city is tracking it as well. Staff is working on this and coordinating our emergency response. But if anybody wants to follow along, you can go to our website, the asheville.nc.gov website, and sign up to get alerts or follow any of the social media feeds of our fire department, so you can get your updates that way as well. And we are thinking about our friends in Florida and in the islands who are already hit. We've been there before. We know what it's like. So we're hoping for the best for everyone in the path of this hurricane. Okay, we're going to now move to our public hearings portion of our agenda. We have one item that has two parts, and this is the 650 Caribou Road, Laurelwood 2. So we're going to hear about, I think, both parts and do our public hearing for both, but then we'll be voting. We'll have two different motions on this. So Sasha, you're standing in front of me, but I see that we have Kevin Lynn speaking on this item. Are you doing introductions?
Yes,
Thank you.
ma'am. I just wanted to quickly introduce Kevin Lynn, who's our new affordable housing specialist. I know the HCD committee has met him several times, but I just wanted to introduce Kevin. He comes to us from Oakland, California, and Detroit with a lot of knowledge, so. Thanks.
Welcome, Kevin.
Thank you. We're looking forward to presenting this project. I think it'll be a very successful project in terms of both maintaining the affordable units that already exist on the site as well as the creation of new affordable units. So the name of the project is Laurelwood Apartments at 650 Caribou Road. The developer is Volunteers of America, which is a successful affordable housing developer throughout the United States. And I've worked with Volunteers of America in Detroit as well as in Chicago on successful projects in those cities. VOA is requesting $1.5 million for a low-income housing tax credit project at 650 Caribou Road, and is requesting terms of 2% interest with interest and principal payments deferred for a period of 30 years. And that loan from the City of Asheville Housing Trust Fund will be secured with a deed of trust. The project will be 100% affordable with 54 new units created and 51 existing units for a total of 105 units, which includes a property manager unit in the existing units. And the units will serve a mix of incomes at 80% of the area median income, all the way down to 40% of area median income. And the existing 51 units actually has a HUD, housing assistance payment contract on it. So the folks who are currently living in the existing units are only paying 30% of their reported incomes as their rents. The developer has communicated and engaged with the Shiloh neighborhood and has made adjustments to their development plans and their site plan specifically in response to the feedback received. The neighborhood is a strong single-family home neighborhood, and the homeowners in the neighborhood didn't feel the construction of a new multifamily apartment building on Caribou Road itself fit the neighborhood streetscape. So since the site is approximately 134 acres, Volunteers of America has volunteered to move the construction of their new building off of the main street. And staff is tonight recommending approval by City Council. The Laurelwood apartment project will build 54 new affordable rental apartments and renovate 51 existing units in the Shiloh neighborhood. And one of the existing units is for the property manager. The site comprises almost 15 acres, and the units that currently exist are all one-bedroom units, but the new building will be a mix of 1 and 2 bedroom units. The project is 100% affordable, with affordability mix ranging from 40% of AMI to 80% of AMI. And this is an aerial shot of the site. Laurelwood Apartments provides housing for seniors and will continue to serve this population following the rehabilitation and expansion project. Upon project completion, the population served will be households age 55 plus. The existing units currently serve households age 62 plus. So there will be an expansion of the quote-unquote elderly households available, or elderly households who will be able to live within Laurelwood Apartments post rehabilitation of the existing units and construction of the new units. Volunteers of America is requesting a loan, housing trust fund loan of $1.5 million with 2% interest, which will be deferred for a period of 30 years, secured with a deed of trust. Approximately $2.7 million in principal and interest would be due at maturity, and the affordability period will be in perpetuity in order to comply with the low-income housing tax credit award that Volunteers of America is pursuing, as well as just the general policy of Volunteers of America itself, which is not in the business of converting affordable units to market rate units, but keeping units affordable throughout the useful lifetime of the projects that they do. This is a rent schedule showing that the one-bedroom units will range in rents from, actually the rents are not listed on this, but this is the rent schedule showing the number of one-bedroom units versus the two-bedroom units, the sizes of the units. The two-bedroom units will actually have 2 baths in them and will serve, and as you can see in the column all the way to the right, we'll have units serving people at 40% of AMI, 50% of AMI, 60% of AMI, and 80% of AMI. The sources of financing include a first permanent mortgage in the amount of $8.3 million. At this time, it is forecasted that that mortgage will come from Boston Capital. The second mortgage and second lien position will be held by the City of Asheville through the Housing Trust Fund at $1.5 million. As stated before, it will be a 30-year term with a 2% interest deferred until maturity. There will be a third mortgage from Buncombe County in the amount of $800,000 There'll be a low-income housing syndication proceeds or equity in the amount of $8.8 million. And this money will be important in that it will require that the project, as long as it is not redeveloped in the future, that low-income affordability compliance will be in perpetuity. There'll be a seller note from Volunteers of America itself, or that currently proposed, and there'll be a deferred developer fee as well of approximately $560,000. That's approximately 40% of the developer fee that the Volunteers of America will earn by pursuing this project. As you can see from the column to the right, the Asheville Housing Trust Fund mortgage comprises approximately 6.6% of the total development cost of $22.7 million. So the project is renovating 50 existing units and constructing an additional 54 units, resulting in 104 total units that are 100% affordable, serving households aged 55 and older. The affordability period will be in perpetuity, and under the current proposal for the $1.5 million, the subsidy is $27,000 per unit if counting only the new construction units. The subsidy is 14,500 units if counting all 104 units. The city's portion of the total development cost represents 6.6%, which is a good leverage of city dollars, and at loan maturity repayments of funds will total $2.7 million. Under the Housing Trust Fund policy, special terms are available to projects where 100% of the units are for households at or below 60% of AMI. This project has 30% of the units for those at 80% of AMI, and the average income of residents is 60% of AMI, complying with the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency guidelines. There's an exception. The updated request is over the $1 million Housing Trust Fund policy cap, but some unforeseen project costs have arisen because Volunteers of America has agreed in communication with the neighborhood to move their new construction portion onto a part of their property which is quite hilly, so some retention walls will have to be constructed in order to make the site more suitable for new construction. And that's why they are requesting the additional $500,000 over the $1 million Housing Trust Fund policy cap. So the Housing and Community Development Committee reviewed the request on Tuesday, September 20th, and voted 3-0 in favor of the Housing Trust Fund request. Staff recommends approval based on the following. There'll be refurbishment of an existing 51-unit senior affordable housing facility, which currently serves households aged 55 and over, but currently serves households aged 62 and older, and will serve households aged 55 and older after construction that has operated successfully for approximately 3 decades. There will be a construction of 54 new affordable units. There will be a set aside of 12 new construction units for Housing Choice voucher holders. The requested City of Asheville Housing Trust Fund loan will comprise 6.6% of the total development costs. Volunteers of America is a longstanding affordable housing owner-operator in our community with a proven track record. Volunteers of America is requesting $1.5 million for a low-income housing tax credit project at 650 Caribou Road. Volunteers of America is requesting a loan with 2% interest, which will be deferred for a period of 30 years and secured with a deed of trust. The project is 100% affordable with 54 new units and 51 existing units for a total of 105 units, which includes a property manager unit, with a mix of incomes at 80% of area median income, all the way down to 40% of area median income. The developer has engaged and communicated with the Shiloh neighborhood and made adjustments to their site plan in response to the feedback received, and staff recommends approval by City Council.
Any questions? Well, are we doing both at once? How do we do this when we have both? Because there's another presentation very similar.
Yeah, but if you've got any on this one, you can.
I have some questions, and it may be for you, Kevin. Nice to meet you and see you in person. But it may also be helpful to hear from the HCD members. So I'm counting 60 units that are not eligible for vouchers. And I know that we have so many people in our community who need access to this housing. There's so much to support in this project. And I certainly don't think it's the intention of Volunteers of America to discriminate against someone based on how they pay their rent. But I wonder why we would not suggest to not exclude folks. Is it possible to get more vouchers because it automatically pays the rent?
For the 12 units that are receiving vouchers, the developer has been in communication with the Housing Authority. There is nothing in any of the regulations in terms of low-income housing tax credits or from the Housing Trust Fund that says that additional units beyond the 12 units can't be used to house households with housing choice vouchers.
So they're just saying they're agreeing to meet this minimum requirement?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
And what would it look like to see a commitment to 100% voucher accepting for 60% AMI and below? That would be 60 more voucher accepting units that aren't currently designated as such.
Well, and
Has that
Councilwoman
been
Roney,
asked?
what this is making me wonder is if, we hear so much, we have the Bowen report every couple of years, and we hear so much about the voucher need as the one bedroom, but I don't often hear it in any additional demographic information. For instance, do we know if we have a large population of seniors with vouchers in hand? I don't think we know. I've never heard it broken down by age or any other demographic than bedroom need. And that might be something that would help us in this case, because are we, trying to get you to do something that isn't even needed? We don't know.
I guess the question for me is also, if a unit is not accepting vouchers and someone who has a voucher couldn't access it, but if it is accepting vouchers, someone who does or doesn't have a voucher could access it.
I'm not sure I followed that.
So you're asking if a household has a voucher, could they be allowed to rent a unit that isn't quote unquote set aside for voucher holders?
Right.
Yes,
so
they could.
There are
Yes.
60 units
Yes.
here that
Yes.
do not say they're for voucher holders.
Right, but there's nothing that prevents them from renting those units.
Except for there's a commitment that's lacking. So I'm just curious, when we're approaching these kinds of projects, when there's so many positives, are we asking for them to accept more vouchers, especially for 60% AMI and below?
I don't know what drove them to, I guess, to make their application more attractive to the Housing Trust Fund policies. They said we'll do 12, but we certainly could ask them to.
Yeah, this is an example of our policy, which again, HCD hopes to bring us some amendments in the next few months. But this is an example of they're applying for what the policy requires, 10% of the, or half of the affordable units. And so they're meeting what we actually require. To your point, though, is that enough? And I think that's a broader conversation beyond this just one project, because we need to open up that and just look at it in the whole.
So we could have a voluntary offer. Has that been asked? Because I would like to ask it. If
I
there's
find
someone
that
here.
we don't ask other developers to, even when they say they're open to accepting vouchers, what that means isn't necessarily that they're setting aside those vouchers. So I'm very hesitant in instances where we have a developer giving us 100% affordability to make additional requirements on them that we don't make for for-profit developers. Now, having said that, I would love for everybody to take vouchers 100% of the time, because we do have another municipality that has sharpened their requirements. And again, as Sage mentioned, we are working on doing that in HCD as well.
So we also don't have as many developments that are asking for an exception to our rule for the Housing Trust Fund. So that's why I would make an exception in this project.
And you spoke to some input from HCD, and what we've been talking about in the recent meeting was this is above the $1 million threshold ask, and many of them lately have been, which begs the question, is the policy in the right place if the applications are always asking for a variance from it? And that's partly why we want to review the policy. So I'm personally okay with this surpassing the limit simply because we've been doing this regularly. And I kind of feel like this may be the last application we see before we revamp these policies.
So is the developer here to answer the question about voluntarily offering more voucher units?
I'm not sure. And this is your first time, Kevin. You're doing great.
I know. Do you like the part where you stand there and we just
talk?
It's a little awkward.
Try and answer
Always
questions
feel
that aren't
free to
yours.
sit down if you see us just veering off there. I think the developer.
She's behind you, yeah.
Good evening. My name is Noemi Rivera. I'm with Volunteers of America. So what was the question again?
So I guess the question for me, and thank you for being here,
Absolutely.
is that right now, there's 15 one-bedroom, one-bath, 560 square foot, 40% AMI proposed units. It does not say that they will be voucher accepting. The same is for the 35 one-bedroom at 50% AMI, 2 at 60% AMI, 900 square feet, and the 8, 60% AMI at 660 square feet, for a total of 660 units that don't
Right.
say they'll accept vouchers. So though it's not our policy, I wonder if there might be an option to accept more vouchers.
So possibly when we first began this project, but right now we have the commitments for these number of units with the capital stacks. We have 62 units right now that will accept vouchers or subsidies. The rest, it's an expensive project to build. So we need to make sure that the financing works. And this is the way we had to, kind of work out the numbers. So, possibly in the future, but right now we cannot accept 100% vouchers.
Okay, so I appreciate that, and for the public benefit, that we're talking about a unit of 15 units that will be 40% AMI. That would fit within the vouchers. That would be an automatic payment of rent. So I'm just curious how that would fit into going to the bank with it. But obviously, that's a problem with our policy when we make the ask. So thank you for being here to answer
Absolutely.
my question.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
Council, any other questions before we hear on the zoning piece of it? And then there'll be obviously an opportunity to ask more questions. Okay, I think we're ready to hear from Will Palmquist, who likes to make a dramatic entrance, but also might not have had a chair in our
It's all about making an entrance.
yes, very good.
That's
You
true.
need like walkout music or something.
That's right. Good evening, Mayor, members of council. Will Palmquist of Planning Urban Design. I'll be giving the presentation for the conditional zoning request for this project, Laurelwood 2 at 650 Caribou Road. Here you can see the existing zoning, residential, multifamily, medium density, and then due to the project being over 50 units for the new building, a conditional zoning to the residential expansion conditional zone is required. So this map and imagery, you can see the existing Laurelwood building located here. And then across Caribou Road is the Dawnwood, I think it's condos, and then the surrounding single-family neighborhood of Shiloh, and then other industrial uses across a railroad track to the east of the site. The future land use, as outlined in the Living Asheville Comprehensive Plan, is traditional neighborhood, and no change in that designation is required for this request. And then this is an overall view of the site plan. I have a zoomed-in view I'll flip to in a second, but just to kind of show the overall size of the site, 15 acres, the existing building outlined in this light gray color, the proposed building to the north, the existing parking area in this lighter color, and then the new parking area outlined in this darker black line. And just give a little bit of background, the original design of the project did have the new building kind of the same footprint of this parking lot area, so closer to Caribou Road and closer to other neighboring residences to the south. And after getting some feedback from the community at the first review of the Planning and Zoning Commission, the project team went back and redesigned the project to what's currently proposed today. So this is a little more zoomed in view of the site plan. Again, the existing building located here and the new building located here to the north. So I think as Kevin mentioned, the existing building is 2 stories and 51 units for senior living. And the new building is 3 stories, also for senior living and 100% affordable. Access to the site is with the existing driveway already off of Caribou Road. A total of 105 parking spaces will be provided, and that'll meet the requirement for both the existing and the proposed buildings. And new sidewalks will be installed, a 5-foot wide sidewalk with a 5-foot wide planting strip on Caribou Road, and then 5-foot wide sidewalks internal to the site. Other standards such as landscaping and open space apply. Just to give a little more detail on that, as well as the tree canopy preservation standards. And the project is surpassing those standards by quite a bit. For example, the open space is required at a rate of 15%, and which would equal 2.2 acres, and the project's providing almost 12 acres of open space, and the tree canopy preservation is required to be 10% of the existing tree canopy, and they're preserving almost 58%. So just some more information on that. Some elevations of the proposed building, kind of pretty residential in character. You can see the different materials proposed, which include vinyl siding, brick veneer, and then architectural shingles for the roof. And then this is a rendering from Caribou Road looking into the site supplied by the applicant that kind of shows the existing building to the right and the proposed building and the transparent to the left here, and then the yellow line is kind of the ground plane of the existing building to kind of give you a sense of where the new building will sit in reference to the existing building. It'll be a little bit lower as far as the base elevation goes, and pretty well screened behind the trees. So if the building wasn't superimposed, you really wouldn't see it at all in this drawing, but kind of made transparent to show in relation how it'll appear from Caribou Road. There are a few conditions with the project. As Kevin outlined, all 54 units will be designated affordable, and you can see the different breakdown of income limits for those units. And then there are a couple of technical modifications that the project is seeking to address through this conditional zoning process. The first of which is regarding the sidewalks, where the residential expansion district requires 10-foot wide sidewalks, but really given the context and kind of background and setting of the site, 5-foot wide sidewalks with the 5-foot wide planting strips and 5-foot wide internal sidewalks are being proposed. And then also that no bike lanes are being proposed into the development, which staff finds appropriate given that there are no bike facilities on Caribou Road currently. And then the review process for this project began with an approval with conditions by the Technical Review Committee on July 18th. The project was continued at the August 3rd Planning and Zoning Commission meeting to give the project team time to kind of change their design in response to the concerns and comments from the neighborhood and property owners that were adjacent to the site. And then it finally was approved, recommend approval at the special September 21st Planning and Zoning Commission hearing. And just to kind of summarize here, the project is consistent with the future land use map by providing a mix of housing types along with other uses in the neighborhood. It supports a number of goals in the plan, including greater densities, providing affordable housing, and eliminating gaps in the citywide sidewalk network, and also supports a couple of goals and strategies in the Shiloh community plan, such as improving pedestrian accessibility throughout the neighborhood by supporting the development of sidewalks along Caribou Road, and also by providing affordable housing in the Shiloh community. So therefore, staff concurs with the Planning and Zoning Commission and recommends approval of of the proposed conditional zoning. That concludes my presentation. I'd be glad to answer any questions folks might have.
Any questions?
I have some. One thing that I noticed when you said it on slide 10, no bike lanes into the development, means also no bike lanes out of the development, which means proximity to groceries or parks, that the folks who live in this development might have challenges biking to the places that they want to go, especially with electric bikes being a new, not only a trend, but an accessibility tool. I'm curious about that. When we look at the into, also out of, I think is something that we might want to consider for future technical modifications. I've also been asking every single housing development about solar. And one of the reasons for this is neighborhood resiliency. If there's a storm and the power is out, how will these neighbors have access to their basic necessities? What does it look like to reduce energy costs? So have we asked the developer if they have a plan to install solar?
I don't recall that I have spoken to them about that. I don't think there is a plan for such, but I'm not positive what their long-term outlook on that could be.
Okay, I know one of the things that we've learned from the conversation, especially with Maple Crest, is that it can help to preserve depth of affordability for the long haul. So if the developer is available to speak to that, I would be grateful.
Sure.
Before we hear from, are there any other questions of Will?
No.
Okay. If the developer could come back and tell us about any plans for solar.
Sorry. Good evening again. So at the moment, we do not have any plans for solar. It is a cost issue. We would love to have solar, but we are currently working with Duke Energy Efficiency Design Assistance. We have partnered with them to do anything that we can within the budget to reduce our energy use. We will be putting in new windows for the existing building, which will help, new roof, repointing the building, so things of that nature. We are maintaining as much of the mature trees as possible, which will also help. So.
I appreciate that. So we have a stated climate emergency here in Asheville and Buncombe County, and there's no way we can meet those goals by ourselves. And so I think about not just for the neighbors who live here, but for our whole community to have a hopeful future, we all have to do what we can. So that's why I'm asking every housing developer, in addition
Absolutely.
to the points around neighborhood resiliency.
Yeah, we would love to. It's just a matter of finances. It's difficult enough just to construct them.
Yes, I understand. And then I also think about the long-term cost of not doing it. So that's
Right,
why I asked.
and we are thinking, that's why we've partnered with Duke Energy, and we do try to do as much sustainable materials as possible.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll share, today I was interviewed by WLOS about this project, and one of the things they asked was, what about the trees? And I was more than happy to share the percentage that is way above and beyond the policy that we have constructed for this, so thank you.
For the preservation. Yeah.
Preservation of the
Yes.
trees, yeah.
Thank you.
It was a big difference.
Thank you. Council, we have 4 people signed up to speak under this item. So if we're ready, I'm going to call on those who signed up to speak. And the first is Ms. Dixon, who I cannot see, but now I can. Okay. You can just pull that microphone right down.
Good afternoon, and thank you for allowing me to come today. You know, I'm from Shiloh. My shirt tells you that. We have a couple of concerns, and Norma Baines, who is our liaison, will speak to most of them. But I just right off the bat want to say thank you to your staff. They have just been great. Sasha has listened to all of our concerns and tried to address them. The couple that I have, I want to share them with you today, and that is that we are residential, single-family homes. And we are hoping that this is not going to open the door when we start talking multifamily, which means apartments probably. We know that this project seems like it's a very worthwhile project because it's for seniors. And we worked with your staff, and they told us that, yes, it's going to still be for seniors, and I hope it stays for seniors. That's another concern I have. We'll talk about that another day. But I think that's the other thing, and then it keeps talking about multifamily. And to me, when I think multifamily, I'm thinking families, more than one person in an apartment. So we want to make sure that with this, that our 2025 plan says that our area is designated senior, RSA single-family homes. So just kind of keep that out in front of us. And I think that's as much as I want to say because I want Norma to have time to share some other things. Thank you for letting me come today.
And Ms. Baines is signed up next to speak.
Good evening. My name is Norma Baines, and I'm the liaison for the Shallow Community Association. To the Honorable Mayor Mainhauer and the City Council, the Shallow community has some concerns about this development. We are happy that it's single-family homes, believe me, because being a senior myself, I know how it's important to be in a home that you can be comfortable in. We are concerned that we have dogwood on one side of Caribou Road with 62 units. We have Laurelwood 1 with 51 units, and now there will be another development with 54 units, making a total of 167 units in that little small area. As you know, our streets are narrow. And we appreciate the sidewalks, but where are the sidewalks going? Because they cannot go far. I stay on Caribou Road, and I know it's hard for me to get out on my driveway sometimes. So do you think of 167 people trying to get out and some on each side on Caribou Road in the mornings, going to work or coming back? That will be a strain. And will the infrastructure really take all those apartments? Will it take those apartments that we have? And I'm concerned because the seniors that live there now, they have to be 62 or older, but it's on their income. And now this is changing for the people that would be in that area that I understand. I could be mistaken, so correct me if I'm wrong. But there is a percentage of going to the AMI, right, what they make and what they have to pay. So we would like to keep the rate the way it is for the seniors according to their income, because not every senior have the same income, just like everybody else. Also, we would like to thank the developers for moving the site. That was very important to some of the residents, that the site be removed because it was right on the street. And that was not good at all. So we do thank the developers for doing that. But we want them to consider our seniors and consider how much it's going to cost for them to live in these buildings. And as Sophie has said, we want to make sure it's for seniors and not for multi-families. We are a single-family resident. That's what Shallow is. So we want it to stay that way. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you. The next person signed up to speak is Nina Tovish. Okay. And then finally, James Ross. Okay, thank you. There were, so that was the end of the public comment, so I'll close the public hearing, but there were a couple of questions that were raised, and who would be best to talk about the age restriction, the change in age restriction, how long is the age restriction in place, and what does it mean when we talk about multifamily? Does that mean more than one family living in a unit? Or, as I understand it, it means it's an apartment. That's just what we call apartments.
I'll answer the last question first.
You got it. Yeah.
I'll answer the last question first about multifamily. It just means apartments, so multiple units in the same building. So it's essentially an apartment building.
Okay. And then who can speak to the age restriction requirement? You should have sat on the end.
Hello again. HUD projects have to be 62 and up. This is a low-income housing tax credit, so we can go up 55 and up. When we say 55 and up, does not mean that, and there are 2-bedroom units, so that's either for a caregiver or senior communities can have the main person who's 55 and a spouse that could be under 55, as long as there's one resident that's 55. I've been asked before, too, about children. Children are a protected class under fair housing, but in 1995, the rules changed for senior communities. So you cannot have children. They can stay overnight, and I believe it depends on the community. They have to be at least 10 years old to stay overnight, and a family can have a child that's 18 and over, basically an adult, can also stay with them. So it is deed restricted, so that site will always be for seniors. It just will always be for seniors.
So in summary, I heard it will always be for seniors.
Correct.
And that multifamily does not mean multiple families in one unit. It means multiple units or an apartment complex.
Correct.
Just so everyone could hear.
And the difference just from 62 to 65, it was just because of the financing, it's
Or
allowed now.
62 to 55.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. A different program.
Correct.
Of the many programs.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Wait, what are you doing? Yeah, we did close the public hearing. Okay, so council, if there aren't any other questions or comments, I'm ready to entertain a motion, and we need two, because there's two parts. So.
I do have one more comment before we move forward. Just a reminder, because I sent this to the full council as a liaison to the Human Relations Commission, and this is separate from the development, but somewhat related, around a source of income discrimination consideration that when we do have subsidized housing, like projects like this, that we would ensure that all the units accept vouchers. So I hope that'll be considered when we look at the land use incentive grant changes in front of us. But hearing the neighborhood speaking mostly in support of this project, I'm prepared to support it.
That is something we plan to discuss at HCD. And if everyone's ready, I'm happy to make a motion.
Please, yes, please.
Okay, on the first one, so this will be about the Housing Trust Fund. I move to recommend approving the Volunteer of America's, Volunteer of America's request for $1.5 million of Housing Trust Fund loan to construct 54 new affordable apartments and rehabilitate 50 affordable existing units for seniors.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. And then the next, if you're on a roll.
I'll do
Or
it.
you have it?
Go ahead. I move to approve the conditional zoning request for the property located at 650 and 652 Caribou Road from residential multifamily medium density to residential expansion conditional zone, and find that the request is reasonable, is in the public interest, is consistent with the city's comprehensive plan, and meets the development needs of the community in that the request, 1, prioritizes greater densities of development overall throughout the city as appropriate. 2, increases the supply of affordable housing in proximity to schools, transit, and parks. And 3, eliminates gaps in the citywide sidewalk network.
This is Sandra, I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you. That concludes the public hearings agenda. We have one item of unfinished business, and that's a resolution authorizing the city manager to enter into an interlocal agreement with the Asheville City Board of Education for maintenance of donated playground equipment at Jones Park. And Brad Branham, our city attorney. We'll just let people exit on this one for just a second.
We may still have people in overflow.
Yeah,
great.
if I don't have anyone signed up there yet
Maggie's
to
on it.
speak, but.
Yeah.
Yes, if you are in overflow, we now have a lot of room. Not a lot. We have a bunch of room. We have some room in the council chambers. So please feel free to come up.
And now we're ready to share.
All right, thank you, Mayor, members of council, good evening. As you said, my name is Brad Branham, and I am your city attorney. Tonight, I'm going to be presenting a proposed interlocal agreement between the City of Asheville and Asheville City Board of Education. And as you have become recently accustomed to seeing, I'd like to start with some key takeaways, which I think accurately summarize the primary points during my presentation that I'd like you to focus on. First and foremost, this interlocal agreement would allow for the construction of a new playground at the property commonly known as Jones Park. This is property sitting adjacent to the existing Ira B. Jones Elementary School on Kimberly Avenue. This would also provide for the ongoing maintenance of that particular playground throughout its useful life. The construction of this playground would be managed entirely by Buncombe County through a competitive bidding process. The cost of construction would be funded entirely by private donations, and the city's responsibility would be limited to the ongoing maintenance and repair of just the playground equipment, and then the final removal of that equipment when it reaches the end of its useful life. As some background, as I said, the Jones Park had an existing playground on it until about September of last year, at which point that facility was removed due to some safety concerns. Thereafter, community members offered to make some financial donations in order to construct a new playground on that site. And just this last week, the Asheville City Board of Education voted unanimously to offer an interlocal agreement which would facilitate the construction of a new playground as well as the ongoing maintenance of it. City staff, including members of the Parks and Recreation Department, as well as my office, have been intimately involved in the development of this particular interlocal agreement, and I can tell you that tonight we support the iteration before you. I want to go over now what the primary terms of the interlocal agreement are, so that we don't have to read the agreement in its entirety here, but I think this covers everything of substance. First and foremost, the Asheville City Schools, which you can see I've abbreviated multiple times with ACS, will actually accept the private donation to initiate the process. This will be followed by the selection of a contractor by Buncombe County who will manage and oversee the construction of the actual playground facility. Following this, Asheville City Schools will continue to own Jones Park, all of the land, including where the school is located and the new playground. They will also own the playground equipment. Asheville City Schools will own the entire property before and after. That will not change as part of during or at the conclusion of this agreement. At the completion of construction, the City of Asheville will assume the responsibility for maintaining or repairing just the playground equipment. This will be done consistent with our existing Parks and Recreation policies for playgrounds of this type. And finally, the City of Asheville will be responsible for removal of the equipment when it reaches the end of its useful life, or 20 years, whichever is longer. And I say 20 years because this is the industry standard for this type of equipment. Next, Asheville City Schools will continue to be responsible for the remainder of the site maintenance, and this includes things like mowing, trash removal, the initial placement of mulch at the site, as well as any future replacements of that mulch. The city's liability here will be limited to any damages potentially, hopefully, resulting from the use of the playground equipment. The remainder of the site, the liability associated with that would not be on the city. And I will note here that it's important to say that prior to the construction, the city, as well as Buncombe County and the Board of Education, maintain the authority to approve the final design of the playground. So before we take over the responsibility of maintaining it, we have the ability to say that we approve the actual design of that playground. During the course of the agreement, either party can terminate this, and with 180 days notice, the Board of Education can choose to terminate the agreement, and if they do, they actually will assume the responsibility for removal instead of the city. Now, at the end of the useful life and following that removal, the city will have no further responsibility for the entire site, none of the land, nor to rebuild or replace that existing playground. In terms of the financial considerations, the city will maintain liability insurance over the playground, and this will be lumped into our existing policies for parks and playgrounds of this particular type within our inventory. The playground equipment maintenance will be funded entirely out of the existing operating budget from Parks and Recreation. Now, we don't know what the removal cost will be, but we can draw some insight from what happened just last year when the previous playground was removed at a cost of approximately $10,000. Beyond this, the city incurs absolutely no cost for construction, nor any site maintenance beyond, again, just the equipment being installed at the playground, and that includes the mulch, which is likely to be the base. Based upon these terms that we have negotiated in good faith with the Board of Education, it is city staff's recommendation that City Council tonight adopt a resolution to enter into this interlocal agreement with the city school system in order to construct a new park at the Jones Park site and provide for its ongoing maintenance throughout its useful life. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions from a legal standpoint. I believe we also have members of our Parks and Recreation Department if you have any questions that's beyond my Parks and Recreation knowledge.
Which is limited to these agreements, I assume. Any questions for Brad before we have got a few people signed up to speak on this one.
No, we received a tremendous amount of emails about Jones Park, and there's been a lot of outreach. My favorite for the room might have been, why don't you put pickleball at Jones Park? Just thought I'd share. But no other questions.
I don't have a question, but during your presentation, I looked out and I saw my friend Jenny Pickens in the audience. And initially, I wasn't going to bring it up, but some might recall about a year ago when we were going over the budget discussion, I brought up crime statistics for Black females in Asheville. And despite being about 5% of the population, folks who are Black and female make up about 20% of the victims of domestic violence in our community. And I will say at that time I was thinking of Candace Pickens, actually. And so when we began having discussions about Jones Park, in that first evening I brought her up. So for folks who don't know who Candace was a lovely 23-year-old mother. I believe her 3-year-old son's name was Zacchaeus. She was killed in Jones Park in 2016. She was shot. And her toddler, on his birthday, was shot in the face. Candace died. Fortunately, he's still with us. So for me, from that point on, every time I hear Jones Park, my brother went to R.B. Jones, and at the time, there wasn't a park there. But for a significant part of our community, when we hear Jones Park, we think about Candace and her little boy. So at that time, I mentioned perhaps we could consider some type of memorial to Candace, or even renaming it after Candace. Because everybody loves parks, everybody loves kids, and that park was a place where her little boy loved to go. Here's where it gets difficult for me. I was surprised by the pushback. You know, we pride ourselves as being a community that is open, inclusive, and we talk a whole lot about equity. I'm gonna say the quiet part out loud. People came to me and said, what was she doing there? It wasn't her park. We don't wanna rename it after her because it will lower our property values. I'm offended. I'm from here. The Pickens are a long-term Asheville family. If you are from here, you know at least one Pickens. So, in their meeting, the school board decided to pass this interlocal agreement, and I heard two of the members mention they wanted to start a discussion about renaming the park. the decision was made, well, let's go ahead and pass this and then come back and discuss renaming. What I'm hoping my colleagues will allow me to do is to be the one to make this motion. In addition to the motion that's before us, I would like to also say, in addition to working collaboratively with the county and the school board, it is our desire, because we really have no say, but it is our desire that you also rename it after Candace. So that's the request I make of my colleagues, and it is my fervent prayer that one of you will second the motion when I make it.
Well, I heard that as a motion. Do we have a second? We have a second from our vice mayor. Thank you.
So, and just to be clear, so if I understood, because I just learned this the other day, so the school board has the authority to name the park, and what you're saying is that with our motion, we suggest that they
Because
also...
at the very least, it would be
Okay.
a counter offer. So if you want me to read it, so it's very clear.
No,
I'm
I
happy
got
to
it.
do
I just
that.
want to make sure it was the school board. I understood, okay.
So I'll go ahead. Do you want me to do it now or after public comment? Because it's
Procedurally, do we need public comment?
Yes, we can have
Yeah.
the motion before public comment.
okay. I move to adopt a resolution authorizing the city manager to enter into an interlocal agreement with Asheville City Board of Education regarding the construction and maintenance of a playground at Jones Park, and that park be renamed after Candace Pickens.
Shanika, second.
And to make it clear, and I appreciate this request, it's not under, because it will remain school property in title, they have to make the decision around naming, and they have their naming policy. So I think they mentioned at their board meeting they would move it through that process. Okay, we have a motion and a second. I'm going to figure out who signed up. Okay, here we go, sorry. Sheets are a little confusing. Wendy Hayner.
Thank you so much for allowing me to speak this evening. I'm Wendy Hayner, and I live in North Asheville. I'm also on the North Neighborhood Advisory Committee for 28804. And so that's another reason for my being here, is looking at our playground that was taken away and looking at a place where children can come and play. We have only one playground at the present time, and that is over in Weaver Park. That playground has a small, and I mean very small, play area for children from the ages of 3 and up. There's a sandbox for infants and toddlers. That's it. And so when I go back and I look at our Jones playground that we had previously, there was a large section for infants and toddlers to play. And so when I'm also thinking about your suggestion of the naming of this playground, I'm also thinking of her son, who happened to have been 3 years of age. He was too young to be able to play on the larger structure, but he could definitely play on the infant toddler structure because it was for his age group. That is what we need again for our neighborhood. We need it not only for the children that live there, but for the grandparents that have their children that come and visit. I want that to be a lovely place, a wonderful place to remember their memories from being a child and enjoying that facility. I do hope that you will take this into consideration this evening, and thank you again for your time.
Mike Lewis.
Mr. Brandon made it sound so easy. There should be a lesson maybe in intergovernmental cooperation and planning. David Rogers couldn't be here tonight because his son tested positive for COVID. I'm Mike Lewis. I live on Graceland Road. I helped build Jones Park. My grandchildren played there. My grandsons come from Raleigh, and
the first thing they would say, well, maybe the second thing they would say was, Papa, can we go to the park? Right the wrong, accept the gift, restore the park. Jones Park is an asset to the surrounding community and drew children and their families from all over Asheville and Buncombe County. And sometimes I'd look out the front door and see a line of little kids of all colors and their caregivers from the Grace Covenant Daycare Center heading towards the park. Those children came from all over Asheville, but no more. Government should be able to do something as straightforward as accepting $250,000 from its constituents. If it can't do that, how can it solve the much more difficult problems of affordable housing and homelessness and growing crime, climate change, and reparations? Please accept the gift. Rebuild Jones Park. Thank you.
Thank you. Brooke Heaton.
Good evening. I should first disclose that I didn't get the memo about wearing orange.
So you're not with pickleball?
I've never played a game in my life.
Well, you kind of
I
have
thought it'd
orange
be
on.
climate appropriate and maybe somewhat fashionable, but I guess now I'm obligated to play pickleball. So, anyway, good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and council members. My name is Brooke Heaton, and I live in West Asheville. I just wanted to quickly thank everyone on council who has listened to the community, read emails, and expressed support for rebuilding Jones Park. This cherished playground was a community effort when it was built in 1999, and now over 20 years later, it will hopefully be rebuilt as a community effort once again. Unfortunately, David Rogers, who was the champion and spearhead of these efforts to rebuild Jones Park, could not make it this evening, but on his behalf, I just wanted to especially thank Brad Branham for your work putting this agreement together and for your responsiveness and diligence throughout the process. I realized that a trilateral memorandum of understanding, or memorandum, was this an MOU, is not an ideal way to build a playground. But getting through all these hurdles and with all of your patience, I think that thousands of tiny little Ashevilleans will be more than thrilled to spend time and build friendships at the park in the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Jonathan Wainscott.
My name is Jonathan Wainscott, and I'm a father who enjoyed taking my children to Jones Park, very toddler-friendly. I understand why parents like it. I have to say, though, that this is something that should have never made it to the agenda. It certainly shouldn't have made it to the agenda in a political season such as it is. This seems like it's a very North Asheville, very special, privileged situation that we have here. We're going to be using city money to be funding the playground, which is not on city property. That seems to be kind of a very special arrangement. I just don't think that this is the way that things need to be done. Asheville City Council has nothing to do with Asheville City School System anymore, since that board is elected by the public rather than appointed by you. This seems like a very convoluted system. We got Asheville City Council involved in something it really shouldn't be, the Asheville School Board getting funding from the county, and I don't think that it represents a very good way of getting things done. It seems just like a very special project. On Kimberly Avenue, which you're familiar with, it's a really nice street. I rode up it the other day, the pavement is immaculate. I just don't feel a need as a taxpayer to make that neighborhood nicer. You guys have all the nice stuff as it already is. I mean, how much nicer do you need your life to be? I'm also thankful to Antoinette Mosley for bringing up Candace Pickens. I mean, this was a horrific murder of a woman who was just shy of her 23rd birthday. And the last thing that she experienced was watching her child shot in the face. That's the last thing that she experienced in this world. And she died. He survived as she died. To me, this is kind of like sacred ground. And I don't think that I'm really embarrassed by my community. You know, this tragedy happened and the community rallied to raise what I've heard was $500,000. It's gone over $250,000, not to restore the Pickens family, but to restore the playground that they feel had been lost, that had been taken from them, when in fact they poached the land from the school system in the first place. The history of this isn't good. The continuation of it is wrong-headed. But if it is the way to honor the Pickens family, then it's got my support in that regard. But this was messy, it's sloppy, it's political, it's selfish. This whole, it's an embarrassment for my city. For all the people who've talked about working for marginalized communities to then, put certain members of council behind the 8 ball as they're running for re-election. I find it odd that your own son petitioned Shanika Smith, the vice mayor, for this.
That was me, actually, but.
No, you mentioned that she got an email from your son about
I
this.
got a letter from him, but thank you.
Okay.
Keisha Martinez?
Oh, God.
Hi. I'm a little nervous. I'm a little nervous, but thank you for allowing me to be here. My name is Keisha Martinez. I am the mother of Candace Pickens and the grandmother of Zacchaeus Waters. I am honored to be here in hopes of the idea of renaming the park in the memory of my daughter and my grandson. My daughter Candace Pickens was born May 28, 1993. She has 2 siblings, Karan and Shaquem Pickens. She is the oldest. Candace was a special human being. She loved people, especially kids. When we lived in our neighborhood, when they were young, the neighborhood kids would always knock and want to play with her. She made a lot of friends everywhere she went, whether it was school, church, and even at work. She was quirky, yet genuine. She was fierce and determined in everything she did. She graduated in 2012 at Owen High School. She participated in chorus because she loved the music and she loved to sing. She also was in track. Candace was the best person she could be. While she was alive, she impacted others, and when she passed, she impacted not only Asheville, North Carolina, but the world, including Snoop Dogg, the rapper, The Game. It went all the way to to the Washington Post. They had gave me a call. It also made it to the UK. They wanted to do a crime story on her. When my kids were little, I used to take my kids to Jones Park. We loved that park. It broke my heart when I heard they had tore it down. My daughter would take Zacchaeus, and it became his favorite park. On the day of May 11th, 2016, my grandson turned 3 years old. He was so excited to go to Chuck E. Cheese into Jones Park. What's supposed to be a joyous day turned tragic. My daughter and Zacchaeus was both shot. He survived the shooting and is now 9 years old. He is doing great. Even though he lost a left eye, he continued to progress. He's in school. He actually lives in Orlando, Florida with his dad. So prayers because of the hurricane or whatever that's going through. Let's pray for him. The park still has good memories for me, and it will always be an honor for myself, family, and friends to keep this park in Candace and Zacchaeus' memory and renaming it after him. I still go to that park because that's where she was at last, and it gives me unbelievable peace. I don't want her passing to go in vain. This picture speaks 1,000 words. How can we not look at a picture and deny them of the good times they had at Jones Park? Let's keep this park in the memory of them, because again, it would definitely be an honor, not only to me, but to them. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing this with us. That was the last person signed up to speak under this item. We have a motion and a second. I do want to highlight that this was a challenge from a logistical standpoint, but an incredible opportunity for the city to work closely with the county and the school system to come up with a memorandum of understanding, which is what we have here. It's one of these areas that is a little bit peculiar because it's property owned by the school system, but a park being asked to be maintained by the city, but the county actually does the construction for the school system. So it doesn't always happen that we end up in these funny little spots. And I tried to, when David Rogers said to me, why is it taking so long and so many meetings that I personally attended, and I said, we could be building the Pentagon, it really doesn't matter. And I'm not sure we're getting some feedback on something. But just trying to bring, it sounds like somebody's tea kettle, and I don't know what it is. But anyway, so it was a challenge, but we all got to know each other a little bit better, and I think it paved the way for future partnerships. And who knows if that's going to blow up or what is happening? Do you think it's the HVAC?
I just want to say thank you to staff and to Councilwoman Mosley for the leadership on the renaming. For anyone in Asheville who's questioning this action, I see it as an example of cross-jurisdiction leadership that advances partnerships with our neighborhoods, which is an example of exactly what our community expects us to do. A path to do the same might be plainly outlined for Walton Street and Ravenscroft Reserve and community gardens, but I think this is an example of council doing important work.
All right, we're going to, how about let's do a vote, and then let's take a quick break and see if we got somebody with the building department that could figure this out. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, thank you. Let's take a quick break, yes. Now we're live. Okay. All right, so we have one final item on our agenda, our printed agenda, which is a motion to approve the Water Resource Department's 10-year capital improvement schedule. And we're going to hear from the Water Director, David Milton.
Good evening, David Milton, Water Resources. Thank you for the opportunity to share some information about Water Resources Capital Improvement Plan this evening. We'll start with the key takeaways. North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality Division on Water Infrastructure, revolving funds, and ARPA grants are available. The city has been awarded 2 grants totaling $5.4 million. These state grants and funds are used for continual capital investment in the system infrastructure. Having a 10-year capital improvement plan will allow the city to be more competitive for future grant applications. Water Resources has received letters of intent to fund 2 projects from the NCDEQ Department of Water Infrastructure. The Mills River Water Treatment Plant Rehabilitation Phase 2, we received $5 million in grant funds for that project, and the North Fork and William DeBrule Water Treatment Plant's Water Treatment Study, $400,000 for that project. Adjusting the 5-year capital improvement to a 10-year capital improvement plan will allow the city to obtain more points on future grant funding and applications, because all the grants and the SRF loans are based on a point system.
To highlight some of the differences between the two, the 5-year capital improvement plan, council adopts a 5-year CIP during the budget process, and the first fiscal year is funded. Year 2 and Year 3 contain projects that are planned and may already be designed or in the design process. Year 4 and 5 contain projects that are planned but may not have moved to the design process at that time. Expanding with the additional 5 years, the 10-year capital improvement plan, water resources master plan, is based on a 10-year time frame, so it makes sense to have a 10-year CIP plan. It allows for infrastructure life cycle planning, assists with maintenance and updating of the rate plan, and allows the city, again, to be more competitive for future grant and funding opportunities by increasing the points total. And this is a copy that you have in your packet for the proposed 10-year capital improvement plan. As mentioned previously, council adopts the 5-year plan during the budget process of one fiscal year is approved for funding. The first column labeled FY23 above the CIP adjustments line, and I lost my place, was approved for funding during the last budget process. The items below the CIP adjustments line in the same column reflect a budget amendment that will be presented to council at a future date to receive the grant funding. FY24 through 27 remain unchanged from what was adopted during the last budget process, with the exception of FY24. There's a CIP adjustment proposed for $15 million that will be applied for through the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality DWI funding process this fall. And that $15 million is the other half of the Mills River Phase 2 improvement project. FY28 through FY33 is labeled Future Capital Forecast. This section of the CIP contains projects identified within the master plan and projects that will replace infrastructure that will be reaching the end of their life cycle during this time period. That was pretty quick, and I'll end on a few takeaways again. NCDEQ Division of Water Infrastructure, state revolving funds, and ARPA grants are available. The city has been awarded the 2 grants totaling $5.4 million already. These state grants and funds are used for continual capital investment in system infrastructure. And having a 10-year capital improvements plan will allow the city to be more competitive for future grant applications, just like the one we're going to do this month. And I'll be happy to answer any questions.
I don't really have any questions, but I appreciate the water department and really all staff about being proactive about finding other opportunities for funding and, trying to set the stage to get as much help from other agencies as we possibly can. So appreciate your always being innovative on finding these opportunities. So.
Thank you.
And we just completed some incredibly large capital projects to shore up our system, the Norfolk Dam project. So a lot of things folks don't see because they're tucked away, but very important to preserving the integrity of our water system, which is a constant ongoing process. So, and as mayor, I've had a chance to learn about a lot of other communities that have not continuously funded their capital needs and fallen behind in their systems, and they're in dire straits now. And so thank you for you all working proactively on this.
I literally, when I was running, all I heard about was brown water, and I have not, since been in office in 2 years, had a single brown water email.
That's true.
Okay, so we need a motion. Go ahead, please.
I'll make a motion to approve the Water Resources Department's 10-year capital improvement forecast.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and second, and disappointingly, no one signed up to speak on this.
No brown water.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, thank you very much. All right, folks, we're going to move into the informal discussion and public comment portion of our agenda. We do have a number of people signed up to speak. I'll try to tell you if you're speaking and then who's on deck. 1, 2, 3, 4, 8, I think 8 people signed up to speak. So, well, but caveat there. So the first person signed up to speak is Ben Irvin, and Ben has several folks ceding their time. William Mitchell, David Whitley, that's a T, sorry, okay, and Kenneth Westall. So that means that Ben will have, Mr. Irvin will have 10 minutes. Yes.
Thank you, Mayor, Vice Mayor, council members, for giving me the opportunity to bring this matter to your attention. I've been asked by the group that I am on the board of, the Citizens for Responsible Land Use, to tell you a little bit about a development proposal that I think could affect all of us in different ways in Asheville and needs, I think, to be on the radar screen. It's called by the developer the Robin Hood Residential. It's in the town of Woodfin. Let me just tell you a little bit about CRLU. Is a organization that was nonprofit organization whose main goal is to educate the public about the risks of steep slope development. It has a board of directors and approximately 150 members, about the same number of followers and supporters. It was formed in 2016 to oppose or prevent the Cornerstone development, which some of you may remember is about 6 years ago. On this diagram, that the red section is sort of the property that was to be developed there. It's on the steep slopes of Elk Mountain and Killian Mountain above the North Asheville neighborhoods of Lakeview Park and Sherwood Heights. It was to be about 184 units. Most of them were going to be 4-story condominiums on the side of the mountain and a few single-family homes. There was a lot of public opposition that our group helped to organize, and the developer withdrew that proposal in June of that year. They simply had an option to buy the property. They had not purchased it. So we went into a monitoring mode after that happened, and we're very happy that we have been able to prevent that from happening, or at least play some part in it. Sherwood Heights sold that property in 2018 to a Missouri-based developer. There's a lot of different company names that go one into the other, but basically it is controlled by a group called Hatteras Sky, which is based in Atlanta. Currently has 2 hotel conversion projects in Asheville, one in the River Arts District, one on the Biltmore Avenue south of downtown. And additionally, they have this one that they're working on. The owner subdivided that big piece of property in 2019 and created a 95-acre parcel that they put into conservation. That was about 3/4 of the whole property, which was great. We didn't even know that had happened until about 6 months later. And we were talking to a local representative and found out they had done that. They carved off 2 other smaller parcels for single-family dwellings, which would basically be filling in between places where there already are lots or adjacent to places where there are lots. And then they reserved this 16 acres for some future development. It turns out they submitted an application for that plan in May of 2021. And that area is zoned, and for Woodfin, it's what's called Mountain Village. And this is a zoning district that Woodfin was working on in 2020. They put a moratorium on it. It's designed for high-density, mixed-use development. Typically should be close to major roads and infrastructure and things like that. Anyway, that's what this is zoned. They, Woodfin had put it on moratorium, then they made some changes to the code to tighten it up a little bit in 2020, and then they were going to further change the code in May of 2021, and the developer submitted an application the day before that was to happen to avoid being subject to the new, I'm putting words in their mouth, they were not subject to the new controls that came into place. Fast forward about into this year, the town of Woodfin believed that the zoning application had lapsed because of lack of activity and proposed to rezone all the property to R21, which is a low-density residential. The property that was for this and all the other property that was also Mountain Village. The developer challenged that, and the town agreed that they would keep the application active until the 11th of August. On the 8th of August, they submitted a different plan. This is the 4th one they had submitted. So this is showing kind of what they are currently, most recently, had submitted to do. It would involve about 105 multifamily units, about 5 single-family units, up to 188 parking spaces and outdoor lots, and they want to reserve the option to have short-term rentals for these structures. I will show you a little bit about what this project would look like and where it lies in Asheville. You saw on the other maps. This is kind of a simulated view from downtown looking towards Reynolds Mountain. Reynolds Mountain development is actually on 2 summits. One is Reynolds Mountain, one is Killian Mountain. This shows kind of the site plan superimposed on the side of that mountain. The light-colored areas represent those areas that have the buildings and the parking lots and the roads. I used imagery from 2006 because that was when Reynolds Mountain was under construction. I was trying to find something, we were trying to find something that would be comparable to this anywhere in the viewshed of Asheville. There is a condominium development in Reynolds Mountain called The Views, and it was under construction at this time, and it has about 45, mostly duplex condominiums. You can sort of see a kind of a light-colored area there where that was being done, and then I think you can compare what this would look like were it to be constructed and completed. Certainly our main interest is in steep slopes and concern about steep slopes. I'm comparing here what this property is at 43% slope, has an elevation of 2,400, 2,800 feet. The steep slope protections were put in place in Woodfin, but only after this application went in, so they do not apply to them. The county and the city have had them for many years. Woodfin got them recently. If those, just to see how it compares with what could be done now, the density they are proposing is 500% of what would be allowed under the current rules. The impervious area, which is what water will run off of, is 300% of what would be allowed, and the disturbed area, which is where they would change the natural cover, is 250%. So our concern, specifically as they relate to the city of Asheville, of course, are for environmental damage from the development of these steep slopes. First of all, runoff and erosion. The stormwater system that would take any runoff from this is all in the city of Asheville. All the runoff and sediment would end up in Beaver Lake. Landslides and mud flows, of course, are also a concern. The State Department of Environmental Quality has designated areas within that parcel that I showed you of having both high and moderate landslide risk. Much smaller projects that have been done on that mountainside have resulted in mud flows pouring down into people's property in just the last 10, 12 years, and this would be way larger than anything else that's been done. And there was a landslide just a few years ago on Beaverbrook on an embankment of the road that disrupted water and sewer service after we had just 2.5 inches of rain over a 24-hour period. The county and the city of Asheville require what's called a geotechnical stability analysis. An engineer goes and looks at that land and determines what can be done with it safely. It's not required by the county in the town of Woodfin, and it's not required in Woodfin because this grandfathered kind of ordinances. We feel that perhaps the city would have grounds to insist that that be done if the developer doesn't voluntarily do it. There's also concern about, I'll mention before I go into this, one of our other members contacted some of you on the safety committee, I think, about the risk of fire from this development several weeks ago, sent an email, and he went into good detail about that. The site has no access concerning roads and traffic via Woodfin. Only you can get to it through Asheville, through Lakeview Park and ultimately Beaverbrook Road, which is in the city of Asheville and privately maintained. Beaverbrook is very narrow, steep, and winding. It has no curb and gutter, very little room for improvement, and yet it would need to carry all the load of the ultimate residents and the construction of this project. That road currently only has 24 residences, addresses on it, and if this were to happen, that would be a 5-fold increase at the beginning of the road, much greater increase in traffic at the upper end of the road. And of course, we're concerned about what the construction could do to the whole area. And then, as I mentioned and showed in the illustration, one of the things that makes Asheville so wonderful, we've got it all around this room, is our views of the mountains and what we see. And with a 6-acre area bigger than it cleared, built up, would certainly change that. So what we would really like to ask you is for help in preventing the potential detrimental impacts of development on these slopes. We would like for you to explore ways to hold this developer accountable to the city and citizens of Asheville. Use whatever leverage you have through the infrastructure that you're responsible for, the streets, the stormwater, public welfare and safety, to do what you can to see that we don't end up with a dangerous situation. Work with Woodfin. Woodfin has been moving in a direction of making things better. I'm out of time. And if possible, provide a point of contact so we can keep you updated. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And your presentation has been received, and also the presentation that you presented to your group and your meeting, I sent to the city administration as well.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. The next person signed up to speak is Leanne Brunt.
Hi, thank you for having us. Yes, I'm a Gator girl. Good evening, Madam Mayor and members of the Asheville City Council. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak tonight. My name is Leanne Brunton, and I'm here to speak in favor of a little sport you might have heard of by now, the pickleball. I don't know what I gave it away. I know many people have come before you with lots of statistics and facts and figures and on the subject, and I'm not going to give this to you tonight. I'm coming to speak to you as a mama and from a mama's heart. I am the proud mom of 2 young men who are autistic. They are on the spectrum. When we first moved here in 2015, they were not easily, accepted and often ridiculed in middle school and high school. When I found the pickleball community, they were accepted. They accepted my children for who they were. And thank you. I didn't think I was going to cry.
It's okay.
It's that kind of night.
It's that mama thing. They were accepted for who they were, and they welcomed them no matter their skill level. You see, pickleball to us is so much more than just a sport. It's a community, a place where my kids can go to feel safe and accepted. It's a great place for them to get fresh air, exercise, socialization. They don't get to play as often since the limited number of courts are generally full, and it's hard to teach beginners because they often pop up the balls or chase them or what have you. The pickleball community has become more of a family, and I think by adding some more courts, it would give the opportunity to help all kinds of people with different abilities. And thank you so much for your time in making it a better community.
Thank you. Okay, the next person who signed up to speak actually wrote out their name phonetically, but I can't read what you wrote phonetically. So it looks like E.C. Clark. You'll tell me if I mess that up.
Hi, my name is actually Essie Hutchinson.
Okay, thank you.
But yeah, hi, my name is Essie Hutchinson. I grew up in Fairview, and I have the privilege of being part of an amazing family and where we focus on farming and conservation and where we own Cheryl's Inn. And I play pickleball there on a tennis court. a tennis court that has so much character, has cracks everywhere where the grass is growing through the cracks. But I find that it would be really important for, pickleball to be more inclusive, and if we could have more courts spread around Asheville. And it's just such a great sport for people of all ages. And, when the little kids around the farm hear the pickleball hitting on the paddles, they just come running up and they just want to play. And yes, usually it's people probably like 40 years older than I am, but that doesn't matter because I think it is. No, I definitely do think it's becoming more inclusive, and all ages are playing where I am, and I think it's just, a great sport to have included in Asheville. So thank you.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, Nina, I think I skipped it. Nina Tobish.
So I just wanted to share two quick things with you. The first is a congratulations for the Caribou Road project. It's wonderful to see something with 100% affordability in perpetuity, and the leverage of $1.5 million for a $20+ million project. Great job. The developer accommodated the neighborhood by moving the building. That's my neighborhood, Shiloh. I'm really happy to see this work out. I recommend that you, when you're readdressing the availability of funds for this kind of project, that you do consider bumping up the amount that's acceptable and perhaps adding some more incentives for sustainable environmental accommodations like solar panels. But yay for that. And the second thing I wanted to talk about, I didn't realize it would be quite so apropos after hearing from the water department, is I'd like to tell you a happy story about responses of city services. My neighbor has had, I believe, 5 water main breaks in a 3-block radius over the last 6 months. Most of them within spitting distance of my house. And literally 2 at the intersection where my house sits. And the most recent one was just this week. I used the Asheville app, I reported it, I took photographs, and 3 days later, this morning, there was a city crew digging up the road and fixing it and patching it. So just wanted to give you some good news, both that the Asheville app is getting great results, and second of all, that our city services are responding promptly. And I'm very happy to see the water department looking to aggressively leverage both ARPA and the bipartisan infrastructure funds, because we need all new pipes, because this is going to keep happening if we don't really beef up our infrastructure. But yay for the win, and let's look to the future and really fix our water infrastructure throughout the city. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. Okay, I don't think I called Susan Dixon. Is that right? Yes.
What this is about. Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you again. I'm here to ask the city to convert the 3 tennis courts at Murphy Oakley Park to 8 dedicated pickleball courts. On any morning of the week, it's crowded with pickleball players, and we're limited to 2 courts, which we convert to 4 by bringing our own equipment and nets. But it's typically 20 to 25 players crowding that court. Perhaps on 2 or 3 of those weekdays, there'll be tennis players, 2 to 4, taking up one whole court, and they play for 1 to 2 hours. Otherwise, that court sits empty. I also ask that you keep both Kenilworth and Malvern Hills parks dual-lined for pickleball and tennis on an alternating schedule, with the understanding that pickleballers would continue to provide our own nets at those parks. If you should decide to give pickleballers and tennis players alternating days on all courts and parks, then please line all the courts for pickleball, not just 1 or 2 at each park. Bear in mind, this compromise would require Parks and Rec to set up 22 pickleball nets around the city parks, break them down and retrieve them at the end of each session, each park. It's a very time-consuming task to break down one net. We respect the tennis community and we do want to work with them towards a resolution. Space is limited, we understand. Although it doesn't seem to have been an issue in the majority of nearby cities that do have and have provided dedicated pickleball courts. Waynesville is building 8 new dedicated courts in early 2023. Population 10,000. Henderson, Brevard, Weaverville, Black Mountain, all are ahead of Asheville in providing dedicated courts. Many of them new, not converted. Interestingly, the combined population of just those 5 cities is about half that of Asheville. I ask that you, our city representatives, represent our burgeoning community by allocating funds for a dedicated pickleball facility that will support regional tournaments. It would be a source of tourism revenue for the city of Asheville and fill a growing need that will only continue to grow. I've been out of pickleball for a couple of months due to some family issues. I have come back and don't even know the majority of the new players. It is remarkable how fast we are growing. Finally, as several of us have previously mentioned, visitors to Asheville continue to express how hard it is to find pickleball courts to play during their stay. It's quite frankly not a positive reflection on Asheville. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, now I'm sorry, we're gonna have to review the rules, pickleball people. But we don't allow clapping in the chamber, but we obviously have exceptions for highly emotional moments, which is at my liberty and discretion to determine. But that's not one of them, so but we do appreciate your enthusiasm, and I really do actually appreciate that you sit through all these meetings and hear all the different issues that we're dealing with, so you have the context for your efforts. So I do appreciate that. And with that, we have one final speaker, and that is Jonathan Wainscott.
I'm not going to say that pickleball sounds like an unfortunate medical condition. Anyway, the other night, last Tuesday, I went to this thing called the Trusted Elections Tour. I don't know if you heard of it. It's this bipartisan effort by, I don't know, Democrats and Republicans that want to do a town hall tour, ensuring everybody knew that our elections were solid and secure here, which I totally find to be the case. I'm not worried about election fraud and whatnot. But I had the opportunity to speak to retired Supreme Court Justice Bob Orr, and I went up to him and I'm like, hey, did you know that here in Buncombe County we have 7 district court judges? They're all elected ostensibly, but only one has ever been seated to the bench by way of an election with an opponent in it, and that's Judge Young. And then there's only been 2 other elections. The total number of elections that these judges on the other side of that wall in the Temple of Doom over there, they've faced 26 elections in their career, and only 3 of them have offered an opponent. It's crazy. Imagine that 5 of you have never seen an opponent in an election. And to me, that really reflects not a very high degree of integrity when it comes to democracy. I mean, if 89% of our elections offer no choice and disenfranchise the public by 100% by offering no choice, that's not much of a democratic institution. And then I was also able to talk to Corinne Duncan. She was a panelist there, and she works at the Buncombe Board of Elections. I think she's the director there. And Jake Quinn, and they were bragging about how they were updating the voter information every day. Everybody can see what the voter registration is. And I reminded them that back in 2018, when Senate Bill 813 passed, and it was a law that Asheville create the districts. In fact, districts were created for the city of Asheville. They never updated their information so that we could see how that affected voting and whether or not it negatively impacted the black community and whatnot. And I think Jake Quinn said, well, you know, no harm, no foul, because the city of Asheville just overturned it. And I said, yeah, Jake, well, no harm, no foul if you consider renewing a Jim Crow policy from 1931, no harm. And I guess he doesn't find that to be harmful, and Corinne Duncan doesn't. So they were very helpful in obfuscating our election system here back in 2018. And I just wanted to give them a shout out for what they didn't do for the public while they were bragging about what they constantly do for the public. So yeah, democracy here is kind of threatened in a very quiet way by not having any choice in our district judges and the judiciary in general and our at-large election system. And thank you very much. And thanks for good support to all of you. Just have a little bit of fun, Michelle.
Okay, with that, we are adjourned.